Kia ora. Welcome back to the Digital Technologies in an Animal-Centric Dairy Industry webinar series. My name is Laura Hunter, and I'm a scientist at AgResearch in Animal Behavior and Welfare Science team. And I've also been the project lead for this project for the past few years. So today is the third and final webinar in our series that's been running over the past few weeks. The recording of the previous webinars will be available online in probably within the week for those who missed it or anybody else who you know who might be interested. It should be available on the AgResearch YouTube page and through the DairyNZ and Fonterra websites as well. So today's webinar is about building a connected farm, which is the final project in the Animal-Centric Dairy Industry Research Program, and essentially the culmination of key learnings of the previous work that we've presented in the other two webinars. So today we'll hear from Charlotte Reed and Gosia Zobel, the two co-leads of this project, and they'll take us through the process of building the connected farms. Just a reminder, we do have a Q&A function, so if you have any questions throughout the presentation today at any point, just feel free to pop them in there. We'll do a bit of a Q&A session at the end as well. So before I get started, I'd just like to remind you of a bit of the background of the project and our initial visions for the program. So the Animal-Centric Dairy Industry Project, Enabled by Digital Technology Project, it's quite a mouthful, but is a project that was started in 2020 as part of a larger AgResearch-led, internally funded New Zealand Bioeconomy in the Digital Age program. But this program specifically was a collaboration between AgResearch, DairyNZ and Fonterra, and was focused on digital technology coming together with animal well-being in response to increased customer and consumer focus on improving animal well-being and ensuring that animals have a good life, and looking at the potential of digital technologies to be able to measure, predict, and improve animal well-being. So at the start of the program, we did some work looking at imagining the vision for what we wanted to do. And so the vision for the end of the project in 2024 was that we'd have easier access to metrics of animal well-being, enabled by the integration of data and models and technologies to improve on-farm decision-making and provide some transparency along the supply chain. With the ultimate, at that point, it was 10-year goal or 10-year vision that by 2030, the New Zealand dairy industry is using quality of life proof points seamlessly through digital platforms for improved animal well-being and system outcomes. So that being said, I would like to hand off to Gosia Zobel, who will be starting the presentation about the Connected Farms project today. I think we just need to switch over.
Yeah, we just need to switch over. Charlotte will be running it. We apologize. Charlotte and I were supposed to be in the same room, but I am recovering from COVID, so we have opted to keep Charlotte safe, and I am at home. But I do apologize in advance if I ramble. Right, so the whole purpose, as Laura has now told us, is for today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the Connected Farm project, and the whole idea of this was to harness different data sources and for a future of different farming systems that can actually be based on a cow-centric as opposed to our current conventional systems. So I'm going to do a couple recaps now. I'm going to rush over a whole bunch of my colleagues' presentations, just so everybody, if you haven't made it to the first webinars, but I do encourage you to go back and watch the other webinars. But very, very quickly, I think one of the most important things here is because we're talking about cow-centric, I thought we should really have this slide in here talking about how we are thinking about things from a cow-centric perspective. So basically, a cow-centric system is a farming system that is geared towards the cow rather than the cow being sort of forced into a system that works for us. And the way that we understand what's important to a cow is we have to understand what she wants and what she needs. How we go about doing that is there's sort of three key ways we can observe the cows in their existing farming systems. This is a little bit challenging sometimes because if this existing farming system doesn't give the cow already what she needs, we can't really observe her using it. So then we have other ways, which is to look at preference or motivation testing. So for instance, how much is a cow willing to work for access to shade, for example? And then also we can look at the human perspective, and that's what we did at the very beginning of this program. About 4 years ago, we looked at the human perspective, and from that human perspective, we were able to create. We asked farmers, we asked them to think about themselves in a cow's hooves, basically, and looking at themselves, looking at a system 50 years from now instead of current. And they were able to come up with what they thought cows would want, but also importantly, we asked them to come up with short and long-term things that they could start doing now in order to get to that 50 years in the future. So things like brushes and planting trees and continuing research, but also long-term. Things like allowing the cows some access with calves, giving them alternative cooling opportunities during heat stress events. But ultimately, the most important thing that came up was the opportunity for cows to have choice and how they spend their day, how they experience their life. And this is super important because it plays in really nicely to a concept that we use in our work, which is the 5 domains model. And the 5 domains model of welfare, I'm sorry, I don't actually see the next slide. There we go. Perfect, thank you. And so the 5 domain models, it looks at the various factors, so nutrition, environment, health, and behavior, and how these are all encompassed by the mental state, which is how basically the cow experiences her life. And choice is a massive component of that, and helps in terms of understanding if she has choice on how she lives her life, then we can be more confident about her overall well-being. The key points as well that we also had that was presented in previous webinar was workshops that were done to prioritize the well-being metrics that could be used in this connected farm down the line. And these are in those, the key ones, which was nutrition, environment, health, and behavior. The key points I want you to take away from here was that there was resource metrics and also animal metrics. But we also did a stock take of technologies. And what we found is that the vast majority of those technologies were able to measure primarily in that health and nutrition, that sort of area, and wasn't really focusing on the behavioral aspect of things. So that was a challenge that we faced, but we were prepared for it. So next slide, Charlotte. So when we were looking at the technologies that were available, trying to choose what was potentially going to be going into the connected farm, one of the things that we saw is that there was great dashboards available, and farmers were already actively using these dashboards. But the thing that we thought there was a major potential for is actually combining the information. So not just knowing what the temperature is, but how is that temperature relative to rumination or that sort of thing. So this is what the connected farm was based on initially. And I'll pass over to Charlotte.
Right, so I'm going to take over now and talk through how we work to designing a project that would do just what Gosia said, is combine multiple sources of data into a single dashboard with a more holistic view of the farm and the cow experience, rather than being centered around what a particular device can do. So we did this by working with farmers and rural professionals throughout the project. The first phase of this was holding workshops with those people to get their input on what a project should look like, both what features such a data integration system would need to have to be effective on farm, and also what data inputs would be required to support management in a way that supports animal well-being. And one of the exercises we used to do this was called journey mapping. So this is an example of a journey map. It's basically a visualization tool that takes you through the journey of managing a certain challenge on farm. There's a lot of detail here, but I'll work through it in the 4 phases that this breaks down into. But in this particular example, our farmers and rural professionals were asked to think through a hot day in summer where the cows would be at risk of a high heat load, and thinking about what data would be required to support management of that event. Firstly, in identifying that an event would be coming. So what data is required to identify an event is coming, and to identify how long it's going to last for and how severe it is. What data would be required to evaluate your options on farm for mitigating that? What resources are available? What paddocks? What staffing? What information could be useful for helping you enact a plan? And then finally looking at reviewing the event and its impact on the farm and the animal. What data would be useful there? The outcomes of these workshops were fairly consistent. So the preferred features for a dashboard that communicated integrated data from multiple sources is firstly simplicity. Farmers were quite keen that it was simple, that it would support decisions on farm, so the metrics presented would need to be actionable, and there was a lot of support for visual indicators and summaries rather than granular data. So the participants were interested in being able to go down into detail on individual animals, but they didn't want to land on that. They wanted to land on quite summarised and good visual indicators. In terms of data inputs, I won't work through this full list, but we worked through a couple of different scenarios, not just heat stress, and identified a range of different data inputs that would be useful on farm. And then the next phase of the trial was then trying to partner with commercial farms to actually set up a demonstration of this dashboard by kitting them out with a range of different technologies informed from that workshop and previous work within the NZ Bidder program. So we partnered with 2 commercial farms, one in the North Island and one in the South Island. These were farms that were already using technology and using it really well. And as I said, we set them up with all those technologies to capture the full range of data identified through the journey mapping exercises, and then fed that information back to them through a prototype dashboard we designed, either as integrated metrics or by presenting key bits of information next to each other to hopefully give them some added value. And we've since worked alongside them to understand the journey they've been on, understanding and using that data, and getting their feedback on how it could be better improved in the future. When we started working with these farms, we had some quite good discussions with them about what they thought wellbeing was and what their thoughts on technology were. And so I thought we'd just share a few of those insights from the beginning of the study here. Both farms saw good animal well-being as being access to pasture and ability to show natural behaviours. So that was fairly consistent. But they also had some interesting points about how they use their social networks when deciding on what technologies they're going to install and how they're using them. So looking at what other farmers in the area are doing, and also long-standing relationships with farm consultants could be quite important. And there was also mention about thinking about broader society and the perception of using technology on farm. This slide is really just to show the scale of the data inputs we had set up on these farms. So we had a number of different devices that are shown there that were feeding information about the cows, their behaviour, the pasture cover, weather data, water system data, lameness, etc. We set all of these up to feed into a central cloud storage, so that's Snowflake in this case, with the benefit being that could all then be pulled into a, oops, gone one too far, into a web-based dashboard and presented back to the farms in near real time, as I said, either as relevant integrated metrics or just presenting key bits of information from technology alongside each other. So the interpretation of one could be aided by the other. Our goals here were really informed by work done previously in the project that had been presented in webinar 1 or 2. So we had a few focus areas for this dashboard, bringing in learnings from projects on using technology to help with grazing management, heat stress, cow experience, and reducing farmer cognitive load. But ultimately, our goal with integrating all of this data was to show the benefit for supporting management on farm in a way that supports animal well-being. I think I'm handing over to Gosia now, who's going to take you on a tour through our dashboard.
Excellent, thank you. So this is the dashboard that we landed on, and this was with much feedback from the farmers. And so briefly, there is an info bar up at the top that shows current weather, and then the farmer has basically 3 tabs that they can click through. So the first one, this is where they start, and it starts with a paddock map. And again, it's coming back to the feedback that we were given. We focused on providing summary data that they can then click through. So the map focus can change from an overview to other more detailed things about each of the paddocks, like shade and that sort of thing. But basically what we see here, this is what they'll see at the very beginning, and this is the map of their farm with all their paddocks, and the blue dots are the location of their water troughs, and the black dots are the cows. And the farmer can hover over top of these and they can find out more about the water trough itself, and also about the paddocks, so things like feed wedges and pasture cover. And then they can slide over to the cow time budget. And this is where we combine a series of, this is where we really get into the combination of data sources. Again, we start out at a herd level. And if we look at the cow time summary for the herd, that's the bottom one. And this is where we have up to 4 different technologies, depending on the farm, telling us the time off paddock, lying time, eating time, and something that we've calculated, which is called cow time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then also you'll notice that rumination is up at the top, and so that is coming from boluses. And we did, I want to say here that we had a little bit of a discussion about how we incorporate rumination, because arguably rumination is part of the entire cow time budget. But the issue with rumination, and this we fall into this issue with the resolution of different technologies, is that rumination, for instance, actually falls across time off paddock. It falls across largely during lying time, but it could also be during that cow time. And so we had to kind of leave it separate. But this is, I'll talk about at the very, very end about the importance of this resolution of different technologies that we ran into. Finally, the farmer as an environmental comfort tab. Now here they can select the weather focus. Here I've left it at heat load index. It kind of defaults to that, but we can ask for a series of things at the different weathers on their own and that sort of thing. It's at the herd level, and the axis is at viewing by the day, but the farmer can adjust that as well. Now I don't want to steal Charlotte's thunder, because she's going to go through a heat stress example with you shortly. So I'm just showing this here. I've chosen, this was a screenshot that I did in May, which obviously we wouldn't have had any heat stress events, but the purpose that I'm showing is that there's this dotted line up the middle on both the graphs that says now. So that was the day that I took this screenshot. And the important thing that I'm highlighting here is that to the left, all of that data, that was a heat load index that was calculated with actual temperature or actual weather data, sorry. And then to the right of that dotted line, we have predicted weather. And so this is really important because the farmer has access to both weather, and they can go, we can use what's predicted to be able to calculate, for instance, what we might expect there to be an impact to the animals in terms of their behavior response. And we can also look back, oh, last time I saw that kind of spike in weather indicators, what happened to the cow? So I can go back and forward. And then now Charlotte's actually going to show you an example of how the farmer could use this specifically for a heat stress event.
Thank you, Gosia. Yes, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect what we see in the dashboard today to the work we did in the workshops with farmers and rural professionals, so linking it back to that journey map. So you remember we looked at the journey map of a hot day in summer and how data can identify, evaluate, help you act and review. So I'm just going to point out the features we've included in the dashboard that link to that specific example. So as Gosia said, we start in the environmental comfort tab for looking at a heat stress event, and the data that can be used to identify it is that forecast weather data, which we have then used to calculate a predicted heat load index, which you can see by the red flags up the top in that top figure. Using this information, the farmers can see what is a heat stress event coming, what is the likely severity of that event by the height of the flag, how long does it go for, how many hours within a day, are consecutive days likely to be affected. So then you can start to think about what options you may have to mitigate it based on that. For evaluate, we go back to the paddock map farm overview. So as Gosia said, on this tab, there is an option to go deeper into the pasture and water system data. And you could do that to look at what options are coming up next for the paddocks that could be grazed and what resources those paddocks offer, what suitability for a hot day. So within this tab, we have included the option to look at a shade map of the farm. And this enables you to look at the shade in any given paddock at any given time of a day of a specific in a year. So if you specifically want to look at a heat stress, at what shade is available in that paddock at 1 p.m. on a February day, you can look at that. And that's quite useful because you may think a paddock has quite good shade, but if you actually look at the shade that's available at midday when the heat stress is expected to be the strongest, you may see there's a lot less shade available than you might have thought. So that's one tab we've offered that can help you evaluate a paddock's suitability for a heat stress event. Also, we have the classic feed wedge where you can click in and see what paddocks are next in rotation. You can also look at the water trough data from that paddock to help you make those decisions. And once you've enacted a plan for how you're going to deal with the heat stress event, you can then come back to the environmental comfort to review the effect of that event on the animals by looking at firstly that weather graph. Did that heat stress event actually occur? And then looking at the lower graph for animal-based measures. In this case, we're displaying on that graph panting time, which comes from collars, and rumen temperature. Importantly, you can also change the scale of that axis from daily to hourly, which is a bit more meaningful when looking at rumen temperature. You could also review the cow time budget to see if the way she spent her time changed in response to a hot day. As I said, we've worked with farmers throughout this process, getting their feedback on their dashboard, their initial impressions, etc. And this slide sort of summarises some of the key themes we've had from those interviews. The first being that confidence in data is key to using it effectively. So, and how farmers build this confidence is either by relating what they see in the dashboard to what they're seeing on farm, or what they see in a technology they're already familiar with and trust. And we've really been in that phase so far in this project where our farms are building confidence in their data before they can really start using it effectively. The second theme that came out of these interviews was that knowledgeable support personnel are key for any technology. So both farms brought this up, and we've certainly found it in this project, is that there can be quite high turnover in these technical companies, and having a consistent, knowledgeable point of contact at that company is really important for using it effectively. The third thing from the interview is the data presented has to be timely, summarised and visualised. So we put a lot of effort into trying to get this data fed back to the farms near real time, which fit with the feedback that it has to be timely enough for them to take an action based on it. And again, echoing what we heard in the workshops, they were quite keen on good visual summaries that they could then dig in deeper. The fourth theme was a flexible time span for viewing the data was important. So initially, for example, with pasture data, we just presented weekly farm pasture cover, but farmers want to look at a longer time span to make different decisions. So for the paddock example, it's looking at the pasture performance of a certain paddock over the full season, so you can make decisions about regrassing. So it's quite important to have quite a flexible time span when displaying some of this data. I hand back to Gosia now, who's going to talk about some of our next steps in the project.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that we faced was this project took over a year to pull together, and it was, as Charlotte pointed out, that there's a lot of challenges when you're working with a lot of different data streams, particularly with high turnover within companies and that sort of thing. But we are very confident now that we have worked through a lot of the challenges about managing a lot of different data streams. And now we have that ability to not only manage them, but merge them together. So that's been a really big positive for us. Both sets of farmers were extremely engaged, and they, Charlotte mentioned the confidence in data, and they were very keen to tell us when they thought something wasn't necessarily correct, or how they wanted it presented slightly differently because it'd be more useful for them. And so I think that engagement has really demonstrated that there's a significant value about not just presenting each individual data stream, but actually integrating those technologies together. And I think also coming back to the last theme that Charlotte just said about that flexibility of timeline, the fact that we've got that in place where we can show all of this data integrated together, but going back in time, has the significant potential reducing cognitive load, not just from decision making, but also from a compliance perspective, perhaps providing proof points of good practice and the conditions that were creating what might have been seen on farm at specific time points. So I think that's a very valuable thing. Charlotte, next slide. Thank you. Now, interestingly enough, we also have come across two other points, which is even though we had set out on making this very, very cow-centric, as I made a point of at the beginning, primary usefulness so far seems to be in the pasture information and that kind of management-focused decisions. And we've discussed it, and we think that there's probably two reasons for that. The first is, we've said it a few times, confidence in the data. If the farmers aren't confident in the data, particularly from when we were first bringing in that behavior data, and it might have been a day behind or delayed, that sort of thing, then they might not be that confident in what it's presenting. But I think the next part is it also highlights the need for just an openness and a bit of a shift, and seeing that there is actually value in these more cow-centric measures as well, the ones that are really capturing the cow's behavior. And that kind of leads me to my final point here. I think there's a significant potential for us to learn from these integrated behavior data. How I put, yeah, here we go. Thank you. So we're presenting this cow time budget, and those of you that were kind of paying attention might have said, what's this cow time they're talking about? And basically, we've presented the time off paddock, lying, eating. Those are all things that are, that's fine. Those are all things that are really instrumental for basically the working life of the cow. But there's also this cow time where she's not doing any of those things. And what is she doing in that time point? And so this is this question that I'm posing at this point is, remember how I was talking about that there's this sort of resolution issue right now with a lot of the technologies where it's kind of hard to tease out a few of these things, like rumination, for instance. But also, we need more technologies to capture the behavior side of things a little bit better, because there's this huge focus on health and physical issues. So behaviors that we're not currently measuring, so things like play, even though it doesn't happen a lot, we know it's the first thing that falls off when there's any welfare issues. So if it is present, then that's a pretty good indicator that the cow is experiencing a good life. And other things like grooming, self-grooming, allo-grooming, spending time with preferred social partners, and using resources. So if a farmer's going out of his way to provide things in that paddock, like a grooming opportunity or shade, we need to be able to capture that the animals are actually using those things, because that tells us what the cows value. And ultimately, that's the next step in order to be able to inform our management and really promoting a cow-centric system.
Right, so just to sum up where we've got to, in the project is we are demonstrating that there's value in combining farm and animal data streams into these integrated metrics, but trust and confidence as the data is key, and the journey to build that can be a bit longer than you may think. But we've got good indications that after continued trusted use, an integrated data approach can help with decision making on farm in a way that supports good cow wellbeing. And at this stage, we're now discussing options for continuation of the project, and we're open to feedback from anyone who is interested, tech companies, individuals, etc. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Gosia and Charlotte, for your presentation. That was absolutely fascinating, and it's so neat to see sort of the culmination of all of this, the project over the years come together, and really it's very impressive. Yeah, so I just like to thank our speakers today, both Charlotte and Gosia, for their time. Thank you all for listening as well. And I'd also like to thank the wider project team and those who have been involved in the project over the years, from AgResearch, DairyNZ and Fonterra, our partner farms, our focus groups and survey participants. Yeah, if you do have any questions afterwards, please do feel free to reach out to myself or any of the speakers. And it does look like we have some questions come through the Q&A session. It's still open, so if anything is simmering in the back of your mind right now, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A function there. So I will start us off with a few that have come through already, Gosia and Charlotte. How did you choose which technology to use, considering there are so many options out there?
Charlotte, I can give it a start, and then you can run.
Yep.
I think very briefly, we do have to do things also from an animal ethics perspective, and we were very keen to work with farms that already had technologies on farm. And so some of the technologies that were selected were driven by what was already available, because that way we didn't have to deploy a whole bunch of new technologies. But I think the key thing is that we went with what the feedback was from those workshops, and trying to capture the behaviors that, or not just the behaviors, but the different data that streams that farmers and rural professionals, everybody we spoke to, saw value in. Charlotte, did I?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer, Gosia.
Yeah, awesome. I will say also. Sorry.
Oh,
Jenny's popping in there.
Just to add to that, so to be able to work with this data, we need to be able to get access to the data in the raw form. And so we worked with the technology companies that were, really open and willing to work with us on that, and to make that available, because they were interested in this project and seeing where seeing the broader potential of some of their technologies, particularly when combined with the other data. So that was also a factor when we were looking. And ultimately, though, if we go back, the wellbeing metrics table, and that was really guiding us, and the journey mapping, that was guiding us as to what data we wanted. Then the selection of the technologies was a combination of what was already available and the willingness of the tech providers to work with us on the data flow.
Thank you, Jenny. That was, you captured that. That's something that Charlotte and I probably didn't highlight at all during the talk, but just how much willingness of the technology provider to work with us, how much that was instrumental in the success of the project. So thank you for putting that.
Thanks. Yeah. I'll just say as well, from the scientist perspective, is we did also look at, Gosia mentioned earlier in the presentation a stock take of technology that was conducted way back at the beginning of the project, and looking at what technologies are even available for pastoral dairy systems, and what's been validated scientifically as well against behavioral observations and what's published in the literature. So that was multiple factors sort of guiding these decisions, I think. But yeah, cool. We'll move on to the next question. We've got a few more coming through. This is great. How much do the features in the dashboard overlap with tools offered in software like Farm IQ? I don't know who wants to jump in there, maybe. Charlotte?
Well, the focus of this dashboard has really been cow well-being. So there are some standard features in our dashboard that are quite common across several things, such as the feed wedge. But the difference here is we're bringing multiple different metrics together that you might not see in these individual dashboards, such as having that cow time budget and being able to look at that against what paddocks they're in. So it's really, like Gosia talked about, designing a dashboard around a more holistic view of the farm rather than around an individual technology or individual input. Yeah. Anything to add to that, Gosia?
No, well done, Charlie.
Yeah, I'd just add that I'm sure there will be overlap if we were to line up all the different systems that are out there which already bring different data sources together. I think they were almost put to one side, and it was quite a narrow focus given the objectives of this work. And I think if we were now to then look, there will be components that will be existing in the likes of Farm IQ. But I think this is a proof of concept approach. And so the idea here being to learn, can we do this? What happens when you do this to support farmers' decision making about this? And then what we would hope is that the developers of the systems are able to look at this and get some insights and some ideas to then potentially take into their dashboards, because it's certainly not something we're going to be commercializing. It's a proof of concept, and it's to stimulate thinking in a particular area that this project was interested in.
Awesome, thank you, Jenny. I've got a few more to get through, so I'll get to the next one. I imagine this cost a huge amount of money. How do you see this being scalable for farmers? Maybe to Charlotte.
Yeah, so the idea of this is certainly not that any individual farm would try replicate all of these technologies. An important outcome of this work is to look at actually what data streams are important and what value can you get out of certain combinations. So, you know, it might not be that you install additional technology. It might be that you have a farm that has collars and they then look at incorporating off-farm data streams. So, such as bringing in forecast weather data or the local NIWA station data to view against their existing data streams. But yeah, that's certainly something that we hope will be a good outcome of this project. Gosia or Jenny?
I don't think it's coming back to what Jenny was saying. I don't think ultimately we don't expect the farmer to individually start doing this, right? It comes down to us showing it as a prototype and showing the value in us being able to, in combining data sources and showing which data sources are the best ones to be able to be integrated and see which ones the farmers actually found useful. But rather than, yeah, I don't think any of us were hoping that the farmer would go and implement them themselves and build their own dashboard.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think definitely the point, or one of the pieces of this was figuring out what pieces could be useful to give that guidance to a farmer. Or maybe it is rumination and lying time, actually. That gives you a lot. So that could help in making decisions on what they'd want to use for the future to provide that information if you were looking to do that for your farm. Again, coming back to that long-term vision that we had for this is that we would be able to use integrated data in the future to be able to give proof points for well-being. Right, so I'll move on to the next question. Were there any comments about improved or reduced human-animal interactions with the use of technology? For example, did the use of technology allow farmers to spend more time with their animals?
What was really interesting in our interviews with these farmers, where we sat down at the kitchen table and we had quite good long discussions about how they're actually using technology. Often you hear that technology is putting distance between the farmers and the cows, but we really found the opposite, where these farmers who were very passionate about their cows were using the technology to gain additional insight into what those cows were doing, what was going on with them, how they were experiencing the farm. So I think one of the themes that we didn't talk about that came from the interview is how they're using the technology not to replace their interactions with the cows, but to give them deeper insight into their animals.
Yep, fantastic. That's awesome, Charlotte. So it does look like we've come to the end of our Q&A and the end of our questions for today. So I think I will wrap up the webinar here and just say thank you again for attending and listening today and throughout the rest of the webinar series. We really appreciate it. Just a reminder again that we will have the recordings of this up and available online shortly within the week or so through AgResearch a YouTube channel or on DairyNZ and Fonterra websites. And again, if you do have any questions, do feel free to reach out to any of the presenters. We'll be happy to talk about the project. So with that, I think we'll leave it there. And thank you so much.